endless horizons, a sea of grass, badlands, wetlands, just that big blue sky. It's just invigorating.
In the evening, the air is so fresh and it's so quiet, beautiful, and soul healing.
It was a sunrise about 32 years ago on a ridge that looked west up the Bow River towards the Rocky Mountains, and the sun was coming up. Coyotes were yodeling in the morning and deer coming back from watering. I thought to myself, I don't know what this gives me, but if you could bottle it, it would be priceless.
It becomes a legacy that you live in, and really we don't own this land. This land is part of us.
The area that's considered suitable for agriculture in Canada is mostly on the Canadian Prairie region, or the northern portion of the Great Plains of North America. All of it would fit into an area, and that's all of Canada's prime agricultural land would fit into an area the size of Montana and North Dakota. Montana and North Dakota probably have a population of about 2 million or less. Canada has probably 35 million people living in an area approximately the same size. In Canada, the Northern Plains region is about 70% converted. There's about 30% that still remain intact. By the time the West was largely settled with large ranches, lands that were suitable for conversion were converted to crop production, but that hasn't ended. New technology, both in equipment and in terms of genetics, have seen the average rate of conversion of the Canadian prairies occur at the rate of about over 140,000 acres a year. We realize that it's going to be essential for us to collaborate with members of the agricultural community, particularly the ranching community, because the space they need to exist as a business is the same space that also has nature. It's there as a byproduct. They coexist, if you will.
My name is Miles Anderson from Fir Mountain, Saskatchewan, Canada. We've been running cows, horses, and sheep on this ranch since 1911. We ranch in and around the Grasslands National Park, so we kind of share ideas on how we can manage things better with the cattle to make it better for wildlife and such. We don't do a heck of a lot of anything that's going to bother any of them, and hopefully some of the stuff we do makes it easier for them. I like to think that our cows are running pretty much the same as the bison did, and we let them. You need a lot of country to do what I do.
Ranchers, when they're given an option, will generally choose conservation with an economic option as a favor to seeing the land converted.
It's the guy that's managing the land that makes stuff happen, and you can put all the legal stuff piled upon piles of paper stacked on top of the titles and legal stuff. It means nothing. This is the part that they're finally understanding, the conservation groups, is they have to have faith in what I do and what people like me do.
My name is Audrey Taylor. We live in Warner, Alberta, Canada. I'm a third-generation rancher. We are located in the Heritage Rangelands, and it's one of the largest tracts of native prairie, and it will never be ripped up. If you have somebody caring for the land that loves it and loves to be there, they're going to do their best to protect it. They tried to come in, it'd be about 5 years ago, and they tried to put oil wells on our land, and I told them, I said, you're going to get in here with your oil wells when I breathe my last breath.
I have found that the beef industry gets a bad rap. People right off the bat think livestock are a negative thing for the environment. And in southern Alberta, that couldn't be more further from the truth. Without ranching, without livestock on the landscape, we would lose our remaining grasslands. Because you go outside the boundary of this ranch and you'll right away run into cropland. Do we need annual cropland? Of course we do. We need those big farms. We need to feed our planet, right? but we also there needs to be a balance. And so what we get here with these large ranches is a lot of wildlife habitat. Because there's this unawareness of how little grasslands are remaining, we're at risk of losing them entirely. Really, the goal of the Nature Conservancy of Canada is to work with local landowners to enter into a conservation agreement where we purchase the right to convert land. So no matter who owns that ranch, they can't convert that native grassland to farmland. And they can still run their ranch like they've always run it and know that for future generations it's going to be agricultural land. And we know that it's going to be providing wildlife habitat and natural resources that we as a human population depend on desperately.
My name is Reno Welch, and I've been in agriculture my entire life. I just love this property. With the Nature Conservancy, we're basically running this ranch exactly the way we would have without the Nature Conservancy. I just call it a win-win.
Ranching in our area is actually a pretty special endeavor because we have the native prairie grasses, which is kind of like an iceberg. You may see 6 to 12 inches sticking out of the ground, but underneath the ground it's actually got a root system that's developed just like a huge spider's web, and they'll go as deep as 10-12 feet because that's what's holding the dirt together and keeping it from blowing away.
Just as important as the forests are for carbon sequestration, and so are the grasslands.
We were really lucky that we were able to put an easement on our place and ensuring that it's going to be preserved in the future.
If you drive from, say, Calgary to Lethbridge, probably 95% of that area as you're driving through it has been converted. And you're converting a grass that's maybe 18 inches high to crops that are maybe 18 inches high. So you don't really notice the difference. But if you could think of that area as forest, if it was forest that was 30 or 40 or 100 feet high, and if you could drive through a clear cut for 2.5 hours, probably you'd be alarmed.
What surprises people is to learn that our grasslands are one of the most endangered ecosystems on our planet. We're losing them at an alarming rate, and we need the cattle industry, the beef industry, in order to maintain and protect these large ranch lands. We depend on having livestock graze the grass, the native grass here, in order to keep it in check. Because it needs some level of disturbance to get the roots to replenish and the leaves to replenish. And if you overgraze, that can have a real negative effect on the grass species.
I mean, you could run a whole bunch more cattle on the place we run, but then the resilience that we have when it comes to drought or fire or whatever, we lose that.
I used to think that I was in the cattle business, but really I'm not in the cattle business. I'm in the grass business. I've seen scarring and erosion from when they thought that they could farm this land, and it's not farmland, and it truly is meant for grazing. Once that ground is disturbed, once the wind gets out of the way, it's very difficult to reestablish anything. But if you've got a cow, she sure will help you out. Biodiversity is really, really important, because without biodiversity we don't have butterflies, we don't have gophers or ground squirrels, and they all feed somebody else. You start killing off one thing, somebody else down the road is going to be suffering. It's a very sacred area for me, and to know that NCC has protected so much of it, and I get to be a part of that, where we're going to have a huge piece of land that will never be capitalized on. There's not going to be any Motel 6s or Hiltons or anything in this area. Once this land gets roughed up or turned under or abused, sometimes you can't fix it.
My name's Cody Spencer, and we're here along the Old Man River in southern Alberta, in the coulees, in the grasslands, and we raise bison here on this landscape. The core of the mission is to reintroduce bison onto these remnant tracts of native prairie that we have left here in southern Alberta in a way that improves the ecological function of the landscape and also connects people back to that landscape. Historically, these grasslands here on the northern Great Plains, they've required massive herds of bison and other grazing herbivores like elk moving across them in a way where they would have a massive disturbance on the landscape through grazing, trampling, manuring, and then moving off for, often years at a time and building up these really productive landscapes over time. That natural process has been fragmented as we've taken land, we've wiped out the native ecology and started farming on that land. But we still have these fragments of native prairie, or we can still manage those in a way that mimics how this ecosystem evolved.
Back in the 70s, people were trying to reintroduce bison into the plains, and people said that's a crazy idea, it's not going to happen. But we've seen something else happening.
Obviously, we're not going to have free roaming bison across all the prairies anymore. Those days are gone. But we have these pockets of land where they still are suitable, and that's largely the places that have been under a ranching land use over the last 150 years that has maintained the habitat essentially for bison. And we think that bison do add another level of authenticity, or there's real ecological impacts that they have on the grasslands that cattle don't. The wallowing behavior that bison have, so getting down, rolling around on their backs, and what that does to the landscape is create these little dishes and depressions all across the prairie that can fill up with water and become little micro habitats for other species.
One of the things that's happened in my lifetime is a sort of this multi-edged loss where we are losing biological diversity across the landscape because of the things we do, and we're losing our own humanity because of our increasing disconnect from the natural world. We live in an era where people no longer look at the future with hope, they look at it with trepidation, and that's something new. It was always the big days were ahead, right? Now everybody's scared of it. We've got a concurrent and interconnected climate crisis and biodiversity crisis. I grew up as a birder. I go out in the woods now, I don't hear birds. That is so weird. It's like going deaf, but it's going deaf in a spiritual way because everything that gives the world life seems to be sort of fading. If you aren't attuned to these things, you don't even notice that they're missing. Like, you can tell people there's birds missing, they say, what birds? Never even noticed birds. People value scenery, and they don't see scenery when they look at prairie. They don't look east across the plains, they look west into the mountains. It's the most endangered natural ecosystem we got in Canada. Europeans arrived in this area in the late 1800s, and if you could farm it, it became farmland. If there was a major trail crossing a river, it became a town. And if you couldn't farm it, then it might be okay as a park. And the upshot was that we protected some of the mountains and lakes and high country, and we sort of wrote off the rest. But nature lives everywhere. We excluded whole species from whole parts of the landscape, especially the large predators, because they were considered to be a conflict with things like raising livestock. And then we developed a body of myth that put animals in the right places. And so wolves live in wilderness, far remote wilderness. Grizzly bears live in the fastnesses of the mountains. Everything in its place, and nature was sort of sorted out around our colonial view of land. Grizzly bears do not belong in the mountains. That's marginal habitat. Where they belong is right here, out in the foothills and in the prairies. This is the most productive habitat. And there's no reason to say that this isn't grizzly bear country. This is grizzly bear country. We just defined it differently. And what we're seeing now, and it's kind of exciting, and very disconcerting for some people because of the assumptions we got, is that grizzly bears are coming back to these places.
We're seeing grizzly bears every year move further and further east out onto the plains, and I think that we have the opportunity to bring back certain species that, you know, maybe didn't exist here 20 years ago.
Coyotes, cougars, bears, I love them all. I have a very strict live and let live policy, which a lot of people don't understand. I'm really blessed to be able to share this landscape with the sentient beings, really. Today we were out and we saw a mother black bear and her cub. I was happy to see her. I was happy to see that she was fat and she was doing good. You know, if you want to live in a space like this, I really think that it's your duty to be willing to share it.
When you have lots of resources, it's not a big deal to share them with the animals that are here. And they just roam freely, eat what they want, and they've been a non-issue.
The last few years we've experienced quite a increase in the number of grizzly bears. And this spring we had a grizzly bear kill a calf. But it's the price you pay for living in this pristine country, and I don't deem it an exorbitant price.
In Alberta anyways, between 75 and 85% of our species at risk live in the grasslands. But the really neat thing about some of these properties that the Nature Conservancy of Canada has protected are that you come out to them and all of a sudden the species at risk are here and you can see them, and they feel a little almost like they're common. Species like the ferruginous hawk, which are provincially endangered, out here you see them flying around like they're a very common species. We never used to have elk out on the Milk River Ridge, but in the last 10 years I think they've started to show up, and with them just, you know, you'll find sometimes a pack of wolves will be out here, and that never used to be the case.
Oh, I'm Roger Thompson. We're located here in southern Alberta. We ranch up here on the hills at the top of the Milk River Ridge. I'm actually a 5th generation rancher. Most of the time the grizzlies, if you get a good grizzly in the area, they can coincide with your cattle and stuff. You know, it's not a bad thing because they're keeping a bad predator out.
Just walking through the grass, you're amazed at how many things you see kind of scurrying under your feet, from any kinds of small mammals, mice, voles, just the actual amount of things that are going on all around you that you don't really notice unless you stop and listen to it and take it all in.
When I got into this, wildlife in the prairies, it was kind of like the ghosts. You thought of them as ghosts. Grizzly bears, bison, mountain plovers. But if you give most animals room, the habitat to roam, and you don't harass them, they'll start coming back. But we're losing still the battle in terms of the edge of the prairies. We've got a lot of work to do because once you lose it, it's tough to get it back. We're not always butting heads with ranchers, for example. We have a lot of things in common with the ranching community. That's the thing I've learned over doing this for 50 years is nature needs more friends. What we hear from ranchers, and I totally understand it, is that they feel punished for doing a good job keeping the species we want out on the landscape. What we need is some kind of omnibus legislation that covers everything from Mexico to Canada through the US. So we're talking, for example, about the North America Grasslands Act, which is already winding its way through Congress. It is a people-to-people thing. If we don't get people on board, we're not going to get the job done.
I think the most important thing we can do if we were really concerned about conservation, if we're really concerned about getting things right, is to stop letting other people do our thinking for us. Stop being told who we are and what's possible by people who have other motivations. Same thing we hear about grizzly bears and wolves as being problems. They're not problems. They're our neighbors, and we can live with we live with some really weird neighbors in the towns and cities we live in. We can live with these neighbors too. We live in a world where we're so distracted. We've got so many digital things, and Where you spend your time is where you spend your thinking. Where you don't spend your time is where you let other people do your thinking for you. And we don't spend enough time engaged with nature. And as long as we're doing that, we're outsiders. And as long as we're outsiders, we're going to get it wrong. But we could get it right. We can belong here. We can be native to these places. We aren't, but we could be.
For me personally, I want to be a part of conserving and restoring millions of acres of grassland, because every year we have more and more native grass that's plowed under for agriculture, or houses built on them, or all these threats they're never ending and they will not stop. And so we need more economic incentives for native grasslands to remain in their current state. And then then there's grassroots things like people getting involved in coalitions around protecting native prairie and supporting producers that are doing the right thing by purchasing their food. The only way we're going to fix the problems that we have here, not just on the Northern Great Plains, but all across the world, is improving the relationships we have with each other and trying to understand each other. Now, it's much easier said than done, but I think there's a chance.
It's the lifestyle. We enjoy being outside every day, all day. We enjoy just being here. And it's a passion. And it's something that you can't put a price tag on, is this lifestyle.
I consider myself really fortunate to have been able to live this lifestyle. It has been one of the most rewarding careers I could ever imagine.
As far as me going anywhere else, I can't see it. This is where I belong. God, you just look around. I mean, where else would I want to be? What has to happen is we have to have folks that like to be out here. We have to save these grass places and keep them as such. And the only way we can keep them alive and still have people there is with cows. But we need big areas.
Green space that you give it up, you're not getting it back. You just won't. So do what you can, when you can, as often as you can.
Probably the best memory every year is after you've been through a winter and you get out and you watch the young calves bucking and playing on the hilltops, the native grass and stuff. That's a pretty precious moment. It's even better if your grandkids are riding beside you and they can see that too, so that's pretty amazing.
I want to live in peace and enjoy this space and protect it for as long as I'm around. This land raised me, it nurtured me, it provided for me. I owe it that much. I owe it that much. That's all part of being a guardian. I feel all my ancestors, and there's not one spot I can go to where I don't think, geez, Pops, thanks. There's just a thin veil between now and never and gone. Look back at all those other people who sacrificed so much so we could have what we have. And that's why it's sacred to me. And that's why I'm a guardian.